A roller coaster, to the core, is basically a ride made up of a bunch of elements. Some of these elements serve a purpose like hauling riders to the top of the first drop, slowing the train down as you enter the station, or turning the coaster around to send you back in the same direction in which you came from. These would be the basic filler parts of the ride, but today, I want to talk about the best elements, craziest elements you are going to experience on a roller coaster. Before we get to my list, please do me a favor by clicking on that like button. Newcomers to my channel that love roller coasters, make sure you subscribe. The lift. Probably the most underrated part of the roller coaster. No one talks about the slow-moving part of the roller coaster. Instead, we want to focus on all the inversions, crazy airtime hills, and so forth. To me, the lift is the sampler prior to the main course. It builds up anticipation, especially on the taller roller coasters like Pantherion at King's Dominion, Fury 325 at Carowinds, Millennium Force at Cedar Point. Every single one of these coasters have an excellent lift that elevates your heart rate. Not only do they build anticipation, but allow you to soak in your surroundings and get a better view of the theme park. Now, there are boring lifts that really don't enhance the ride, which is why I'm pinpointing the ones that I found on Giga Coasters and Hyper Coasters. Other roller coasters, the lift is just a means to getting the ride started. The launch. There are only two ways a roller coaster can get started. Either using a lift to build up all that kinetic energy, or a launch to accelerate you to the maximum speed. When a manufacturer decides to use a launch, it turns into one of the best parts of the ride. In fact, some roller coasters, the launch is basically the whole ride. Case in point, when Top Thrill Dragster was operating with its hydraulic launch, the launch was the best part of the ride. Sure, the giant 420-foot top hat is still great, but nothing competes with being thrusted back into your seat by bone-crushing forces. Even in its newer rendition, Top Thrill 2 at Cedar Point now utilizes a swing launch. Even more to my point, this launch is what makes Top Thrill so exciting. Riders get to accelerate forward and backward down a long stretch piece of track, reaching speeds well over 100 miles per hour. Launches come in many different forms, from your most typical LSM launch, a style that uses magnets to accelerate the train, LIMs, which is another form using magnets, tire launch, cable pole launch, which will use either pneumatics or hydraulics to accelerate a winch down the track at impressive speeds. Bottom line, you can never go wrong with a launch, because who doesn't like that option of just jumping right into the action? The first drop, the OG of all elements. It's a fundamental part of the ride that delivers all, if not most, of the energy to send that train through the rest of the ride. Some roller coasters feature a functional first drop. It doesn't really provide a lot in the thrill department, but sets up the coaster for what's to follow. For me though, I love the first drop that makes a statement, being it diving straight down at 90 degrees, maybe a beyond vertical drop. It's even possible that this element could start off by flipping you upside down. My all-time favorite would be a classic first drop that the coaster takes head on. No frills, just a good steep drop that delivers on all the airtime goodness. Fury 325 does this moment right by delivering some of the best sustained airtime as you fall over 300 feet back to Earth. Maverick at Cedar Point takes the traditional first drop and increases up the intensity. The ride pulls off a 95-degree first drop that delivers ejector airtime, followed by bone-crushing G-forces as you quickly snap right into a bank turn. Overall, hypercoasters are the king of the first drop, delivering that sustained airtime that most coaster enthusiasts live for. Pretzel Loop. The first ever Pretzel Loop was introduced on Superman Ultimate Flight at Six Flags Over Georgia. Don't let this element fool you thinking it's just a basic rendition of the vertical loop. Riders start out at the highest point of the inversion before diving forward, flipping over onto your stomach as you reach the bottom of the loop. The G-forces are the strongest at this point, feeling like you have someone sitting on top of your chest. I would consider a Pretzel Loop to be one of the most intense inversions you can find on a roller coaster. Right now, I would say that the Pretzel Loop found on Tatsu at Six Flags Magic Mountain is the best, but honestly, you can't go wrong with any of these inversions. The airtime hill. If the first drop is the OG, then the classic airtime hill is a close second. This is about as basic as you can get when it comes to quality airtime. A nice giant airtime hill to either send you flying out of your seat or float gracefully as you crest over the peak of the element. Similar to the first drop, hypercoasters and gigacoasters is where you will find the best airtime hills. My all-time favorite airtime hill would be located on Mako at SeaWorld Orlando. It's the second element of the ride after the first drop, so the coaster is still traveling with a lot of speed. Riders will start floating out of their seat prior to hitting the crest of the hill and won't park it back down until you hit the bottom of that hill. It's a few seconds of floater airtime glory. Classic Woodies or even some modern ones will tackle this element as well. El Toro at Six Flags Great Adventure has incredible double airtime hills that deliver insane ejector airtime. They may not be as sustained as Mako, but make it up with intensity and aggression. Zero G roll. Before Rocky Mountain Construction walked out on the scene and basically made the Zero G roll as their exclusive inversion, we had B&M, who was the one who actually introduced this element all the way back in 1992. Batman the Ride took riders upside down in a snappy twisted maneuver that provided some weightlessness and lateral forces. Similar to a Heartline roll, the difference is how you enter and exit this maneuver. A Zero G roll is like an airtime hill, except at the peak of that hill, riders are twisted upside down through a continuous 360-degree rotation until you exit the inversion on the other side. A Heartline roll, which I will talk about shortly, enters and exits the element straight on. There are some roller coaster enthusiasts that will blend both of these elements together, but note, there is some variation. Kumba at Busch Gardens Tampa is also another great example of how a Zero G roll is done right. Skyrocket at Kennywood probably has the most underrated Zero G roll with its crazy ejector airtime as you flip upside down. Zero G stall. First we had the Zero G roll, now there's the Zero G stall. Instead of immediately rotating riders through the element, a Zero G stall does exactly as the name says. Stall as you are upside down. The longer the element is extended, the better the inversion. Intamin has a couple great stalls, the one found on Velocicoaster at Universal Studios, Islands of Adventure. After taking on the top hat, riders get tossed upside down for a couple seconds as you fly over the pathway below. Pantheon at Busch Gardens Williamsburg also has a great stall. It doesn't travel over any pathways, but has some exciting weightlessness and a fun head chopper as you exit the inversion. My all-time favorite stall is currently the one found on Jersey Devil Coaster at Six Flags Great Adventure. The ride flips upside down and stays in that position for what feels like forever. It's a great sensation that I hope more future roller coasters can utilize. Heartline roll. Alright, time to round out the three similar inversions and talk about the Heartline roll. I might have said that RMC took the Zero G roll, but truthfully, they are the king of the Heartline roll. Instead of cresting the inversion like an airtime hill, this maneuver you take straight through. The train and track essentially rotate around you, thus keeping your Heartline in the center, thus the name. RMC has a ton of great roller coasters that utilize this inversion, but my all-time favorite is found on Velocicoaster, nicknamed the Mosasaurus roll. This is the last element of the ride before flying back up into the brake run. The coaster gets low to the water and flips you right upside down through a fast-paced inversion. What makes this Heartline roll stand out from the pack would be the famous upside-down airtime that incurs. Because of the design of the trains, riders sit a little higher off the ground, so when you roll upside down, your body mass isn't exactly centered, providing negative Gs. Not only is this the best Heartline roll, it's also my favorite moment on any roller coaster. Outer Banked Airtime Hill. Rocky Mountain Construction took the classic Airtime Hill and cranked it up to 11. Instead of cresting the hill at a 0-degree bank, an outer banked hill first bends the hill into a dog-leg turn of sorts while cresting the hill. The train will now bank in the opposite direction in which the coaster is turning, thus delivering strong negative Gs through the element. RMCs are the ones who introduced this element, and their most famous version would be the one found on Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point. This hyper-hybrid roller coaster uses the original bend of the wooden structure to create some out-of-the-ordinary airtime hills. The Outer Banked Hill is the one that really turned heads. Never did we see a bank hill of sorts being banked out in the opposite direction. Intamin also took this element and started to tweak it a little bit. Pantheon has a massive outer bank turn that provides more floater than ejector because of its drawn-out nature. Flying Snake Dive. As far as I could find, Storm Runner at Hershey Park is the only roller coaster that features this element. This inversion is like a zero-G roll and a dive loop combined into one. The coaster starts off by rotating through a roll, but then immediately enters a dive while continuing the rotation. It's a fast-paced element that delivers some laterals and negative Gs. The craziest place to experience this moment is sitting in the back of the train. That way you will get more of that whip entering the inversion. Well, that's gonna wrap up today's list. Tell me what you think are the craziest moments on a roller coaster down in the comments. Until next time, this is X Screen Thrills.